Hi, everyone. I'm Chad Gray. I'm a software engineer at Dell Technologies. And recently I've been working as an engineering product owner on APEX Navigator. So thank you, Pratish, for doing the introduction to APEX Navigator. It's been a really exciting product to work on. And we delivered APEX Navigator to simplify storage management and to really make that block storage for AWS available and easier to get usage of. So Pratish touched on the five major focus areas we had with APEX Navigator, including security, deployment, management, monitoring, and mobility. To get going with all these great features and these focus areas, it really starts with getting access to the consumers and the customer's AWS environment. And so that's what I'm going to start with today, is talking about how APEX Navigator accesses the customer's AWS account. So in the next 10 minutes, I'm going to touch on how our solution there, how to connect an AWS account from APEX Navigator's UI, how to audit that access and account management. Vendor solutions are being adopted widely, and they're being adopted because they enhance operations. And it's very important for vendors to take security first and to access these environments in a secure manner. You'll find some vendors ask for shared credentials or a service account and a credential to access the environment. And there's some challenges with this, namely around credential management and the communication loop that's needed between the vendor and the consumer with the management there. And with this approach, the vendor isn't always able to invalidate the credentials if needed. With APEX Navigator, we look to solve this by leveraging AWS roles and policies, which means there's no AWS access keys that need to be exchanged. And Dell or the consumer can disable this access at any time. So with that, I want to look at this component to just provide a high-level view of what the configuration is needed and how we're accessing the AWS accounts. On the right, you'll see the consumer's AWS account, and what's needed is to create an AWS role. With that AWS role is a trust policy, and what the trust policy does is it explicitly says who can access or who can assume this role, and that's an AWS IAM entity, or in the trust policy referred to as a principal. This trust policy is automatically generated, unique to the consumer and the account by APEX Navigator, and we'll give the policy to the customer to go install with their role. Next is a permission policy. This covers all the AWS actions and resources that are allowed by the AWS role. With this configuration, it grants APEX Navigator trust to access the AWS account and stand up the resources necessary to run the Dell storage offers. We approached this solution because we wanted to provide something simple to configure and secure for our customers. With this context, I'm going to jump over to the demo to show how to connect an AWS account.
Can I have a question here?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So if you have this your SaaS application, can you federate it with your Active Directory or some Airbag or LDAP or wherever is there?
Oh, great. I'm happy you touched on that. And I actually jumped past that into the access to the AWS account, but you're right. Our users will have a Dell Premier account, which is registered with their company, and they will configure and federate their login with their identity provider. Mm-hmm. And so every user logging into APEX Navigator is verified and logged in with their identity provider.
So onboarding will look like this. So my standard onboarding procedure with a corporation would mean the identity provider will create the identity in the company, and then I link this identity with the Dell Premier account.
Yes. So that identity gives you SSO across Dell APEX and Cloud IQ.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
And Premier. Yes. All right, and what you're viewing here is the APEX Management Console, where you'll access APEX Navigator and centrally available to you. And the way to get here is go to Manage Storage, and then we'll have our cloud deployments. And we'll this drop down brings you to Managing Cloud Access. Once we click into Manage Cloud Access, this will take us to the Manage or the Cloud Access tab, where you'll find all the AWS accounts that you've connected to APEX Navigator. We want to add and connect a new account. So what we need is that AWS account ID. So we'll go to the AWS Management Console, we'll copy that account ID, we'll come back to Navigator, click Add Account, and this will pop out this side panel. We'll paste in that AWS account ID, we'll click Enter, and what Navigator is doing at this point is it's generating that custom trust policy that we talked about earlier that's unique to this account and the customer logged in. We provide the permission policy that we also discussed, and you can we provide detailed instructions for how to install this in AWS with this dropdown. We allow you to view the policy we're asking you to install with all the necessary permissions and actions that are required. And at this point, we also provide the trust policy, which you can view. And so we'll copy this policy, and we're going to go over to the AWS Management Console. And we need to navigate to the IAM dashboard roles, which is where we're going to go create our role. The first step is to select the trusted entity type, which is custom trust policy. We'll paste that trust policy that we got from Navigator and move on to the next step. Here, we need to add a permission policy. I earlier already added one, so we're going to search for it and select it and go to the next step. The third step in creating a role is to name it and to review the policies that we created. And so if I was using APEX Navigator, I would take these two policies to my AWS administrator who's likely overseeing this environment and ask them to create this role for me. And then what is needed is that AWS role ARN, which is the unique identifier to that role. And so once you create the role, you click in to view the details, and you would select that role ARN or AWS resource name, and that's the last piece of information that's needed to connect your account to APEX Navigator. So switch back to APEX Navigator, we paste in this role ARN, and at this point we click Grant Access, and Navigator will verify that it has access to the account, and that account will now be available to you to deploy your storage and leverage APEX's features.
I have a question
Yes.
regarding the setup process. Do you also have infrastructure as code examples for setting this all up as well? If my team uses CloudFormation or Terraform or Pulumi or something, can they just go to a GitHub repo that has this setup process and run through that instead?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I intended to talk about, while I'm showing this in the UI, all of this is available through our API. And I believe, Pratish, you had touched on that we just released a Terraform provider for APEX.
Okay.
And so with that, you should be able to write all the tooling to automate this.
Okay, excellent. Yes. Thank you.
Thanks. And also just to want to touch on, once you kick off these AWS account management activities and events in Navigator, you can find, you can view them from the Jobs tab. To check on their success. The generate trust policy is a relatively quick job. It just takes 4 seconds to kick off and create that custom trust policy for you. But you can view it here to see who triggered it and ran it. Also, we provide the APEX audit log. So if you filter by internal and onboarding, this will bring up a detailed audit of who kicked off these account management events with what resources and when, which gives you visibility into what's happening with your resources. And the last piece I want to look at on audit is we've looked at how to audit this in APEX Navigator. Now the customer can also go to their AWS account and look at CloudTrail and see exactly what APEX Navigator is doing in their account. We leverage the Assume Role API to access the account, and with the Assume Role API call, we tag the sessions that we open, the temporary sessions. So you'll see here we have the APEX job name and APEX job ID, and so you can associate all the activity that you're doing in Navigator, such as a system deployment with the actual API calls that are taking place in your account. And you can manage that job from Navigator. We also pass the source identity of the user that's federated with your custom or company identity, so that you can see tracing of who triggered this.